Hi there. Welcome to Thrive to Learn. I'm your host, Deanna Bruce. I work with K 12 schools around the country at the intersection of health and education equity. I advise, consult, train, whatever it takes to help leaders improve their school's culture, health, and safety by bringing empathy and equity to school health policy as school communities implement the student centered solution. And through my work, I get to connect with so many amazing people at the forefront of their fields and learn about their efforts to improve the K 12 experience, which is what's so exciting about this vlogcast. So, with that in mind, I started this vlog to be able to invite others to this conversation and to allow all of you all to participate as well by joining in and listening. I love talking to people, hearing their stories, and learning from them. And I want everyone to feel empowered to join the conversation to improve school culture so that all students can thrive to learn. I'm so excited to welcome Rebecca Miner today. Rebecca is a licensed social worker, professor, coach, trainer, and gender specialist with her own private practice. I met Rebecca a while back through her sibling. We were told, you should meet Rebecca. You should meet Deanna. Well, we finally met, and I'm thrilled to have her here today. So, Rebecca, let's go ahead and get started and dive right in. As a clinician, coach, and trainer, you do a lot. Tell me about your career journey. Tell everyone listening in your career journey. What has driven you to this work in the gender and sexuality space?
Okay. So I think probably the easiest way to tell this story is to start in high school. I was an avid ally at the time before I was aware of my own identities, and got into college and received a flyer in the mail saying I needed to choose which college write or freshman writing seminar I was going to take. And out of the list, there was a course that stood out to me because it was called Queer and Pleasant Danger. And I was like, I don't think we're even allowed to use that word. And so that was really what started it. And then at the time, there weren't specific courses dedicated to that beyond kind of queer theory courses. So I took as many as I could and combined psych classes and did independent studies and just kind of tried to, anytime I could make my work about helping people live authentically, whatever that looked like, whether it was around gender or sexuality, I tried to kind of tailor any assignments to that. So um, that was kind of my path forward. And then I started working in eating disorders, actually, which was what I thought I wanted to do. And it was in that role, working at McLean, that I started a research fellowship and realized that what I was continually seeing, not only in the data, but also with the clients we were working with, was that if they had any kind of symptoms going on related to their eating that were also connected to their gender identity, when we honored their gender identity, some of their symptoms started to fall away. And I was like, okay, this is fascinating. And everything, again, kept leading me back to the body and back to the intersection of trauma, gender, and sexuality. So that's when I went to grad school and really honed in on working specifically around gender and sexuality. And as soon as I was able to start my own practice, I was like, I'm going all in. I'm just going to niche, and no matter what anybody says. And at the time, I was told it's way too niche. It's never going to work out. And that was in 2015. And I've been booked and busy since. So that's kind of my career path in a nutshell.
Well, and I'm so glad that that this is your career path and that you do this work. I've worked with a lot of school social workers, and they say the very same thing that you found, that once you start addressing the gender issue that the kid has going on, so many of the other symptoms seem to get resolved. And we're chasing the wrong thing, and
Yes.
in many ways. So I have like two questions related to that. One is, what do you find that parents need to be able to be supportive of their young person? And then the second question is related to the young person. What do their children need from their parents?
Okay. So parents need a few things. Um, more than anything, they need permission to not know everything and have that be okay. A lot of times I feel like parents get flustered when they're like, I should have all the answers and it's my job as a parent to know what to do here and what to expect at every turn. And the reality is this wasn't in the books that they read when they were planning to have a kid. So they need some permission to explore, to not know, and also to get some real education around this because generationally, there simply wasn't access to some of this information in the same way that there is now. So, what I find tends to help is providing people with resources and then really inviting them into their own exploration around how perhaps the gender binary has inhibited them in their own lives so that they start to see maybe this actually isn't serving all of us. And it's not as simple as just like your kid is trans, we're here to focus on supporting your kid, but also expanding their worldview around the ways we all think about gender and sexuality. So those are initial supports. I think also just acknowledging that two things can be true at the same time, right? You can love your kid and be terrified about this. You can want to show up for your kid to the best of your ability and also maybe even wish that this wasn't true. And I think it really surprises parents when I name that. I think in part because they expect me to be so gung ho about like, you have to accept and you have to be okay with this. And the reality is, at the beginning of some people's process, that's not where they are. So I think some permission across the board is really important. For kids, they need their parents to listen when they tell them who they are, right? And really make an effort to see them as who they tell them they are, right? So parents will often get all flustered around pronouns and names. And the reality is, those habitual patterns won't change until they start to see their kid for who they are. So when your kid tells you who they are, you need to listen.
I appreciate that. I love that. So when you prioritize these things that parents need, to be able to listen when their kid tells them, "Hey, this is who I am," like where do you start? Or let's say that you've got a family member or even a school educator who is unwilling to accept another person's gender identity. Where do you start the conversation with them?
That's a good question. I I would do it similarly to how I was talking about working with parents, in that we want to meet people where they are, right? So understanding what's often really a lot of fear, and getting to know what it is that's getting in the way of them being able to show up. So if it is that they're afraid this might be a phase, or they don't entirely think, this is true, or that they're concerned that this is going to impact their future in some negative way, we have to understand what's getting in the way of them kind of getting on board to ultimately be able to best support them in doing so.
And I want to stay with this idea of that this may be an educator who is struggling to support a young person. And oftentimes, especially since the pandemic, we are spending more time talking about a history of trauma that a young person might have, and that schools are trying to be trauma informed and are getting trained up. Not only the social workers, but the mental health teams are making sure that other educators in the school building, the deans of students, folks who actually are gatekeepers for students to their education, to being in the building or out of the building during a school day, preparing them to understand trauma. So specifically thinking about that, what can schools do to support a young person who may be trans, non-binary, gender diverse, who may have a history of trauma, or they're bringing to school this memory of the unsupportive environment that they have back at home?
Another really solid question. I get a lot of the same questions in interviews, so I'm like, "Ooh, that's a curveball. I like it." So, um, first and foremost, schools need to do their work around adequate training. And I think oftentimes educators get kind of pinpointed as like, oh, well, they're not getting it or they're not doing this. And the reality is I don't believe it should be on the educator as an individual to make sure that they're on top of all of these pieces. They're doing their best, likely underpaid and under-resourced and trying to juggle a million things. So I believe it's the school's responsibility to bring in someone like myself or like you to do a training or a series of trainings to adequately support not just the educators, but the entire school staff, that like including cafeteria people, like janitors, anyone who's working in the school. I believe if you're going to change the culture of a school, every single person in that building needs to have an opportunity and access to education around this.
Yeah.
Then and then so doubling down on that is adding the element of trauma. And all schools should be considering that students are likely coming in with their own histories and they may be coming in with challenges at home, or maybe it's not a current issue, but they have past experiences in which school has been a really traumatizing place for them. And so there are ways to be considerate around that and make sure that they're creating sufficient accommodations and providing spaces for students to be able to unwind. Like, for example, if they have a lot of sensory issues, maybe there's an area in the school that's kind of dim and has some bean bags where kids can go like settle down and kind of relax their nervous system. And schools won't, consider some things like that unless they have the resources and information to explain why something like that could actually be incredibly effective.
Yeah, that's great. I love those specific examples. I think that's really helpful for educators. And and yeah, maybe I'm asking the hard questions because I know the
No,
folks
I love it.
who I engage with are, principals, superintendents, educators, social workers that are working in schools, and so these are the kinds of questions that they bring to me.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I'm getting a lot of questions about this anti-trans, anti-LGBT environment that we seem to be living in. This idea that there is this issue that trans folks aren't necessarily those who need to be protected, but those who we may need to that we should pass legislation against. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to exist in that space for people who are transgender, but also for all of us. It's been a difficult time, and I'm wondering what are one or two things that you would recommend to any individual, someone working in a school or someone not in a school, that they can do to sort of resist, push back on, be an ally in the face of all of this anti-trans heat that we're experiencing.
I really appreciate you asking that because I think now more than ever, we really need active allyship. So, to meet that need, I actually created a page on my website that has curated resources and opportunities to get involved so that you don't even have to deal with the choice paralysis of not knowing which organizations to engage with or who to donate to. And I've literally made it as quick and easy as possible for folks to log on and fill out, sign some petitions, make some phone calls with scripts of exactly what you have to say to really take all the guesswork out of it. Um, but more than anything, it's about showing up and not being a bystander. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times folks are scared of saying the wrong thing, and that results in them saying nothing at all. And so I would rather see people trying than sitting back and not saying anything. So I think really trying to be as active as possible in that allyship and also knowing that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So I sometimes have a hard time with that because when I get worked up around the legislation, I'm like, we need to fix everything today. And the reality is, we can't do it all in one day, but together we can collectively work on taking breaks when we need to and also forging ahead when we have the time and resources. So I think getting as involved as possible is huge right now.
So as we close out, I want to think back to, that school leader or the educator who's worried about what to say, worried about how to support a kid in their class. What do you wish that educators or school leaders knew or understood about supporting gender diverse students and peers?
I think, first of all, I want folks to know that they don't have to worry or wonder alone about these subjects, right? There are people who are dedicating their whole lives to understanding these concepts. And so it may not be that school leader or that whoever, principal's area of expertise. And that doesn't mean that they can't show up for these kids. More than anything, they're just like all the other kids. And so we don't need to treat them at like there's some kind of foreign something that we're unfamiliar with. And at the same time, there are some thoughtful considerations that need to be made specific to their population. So I think, again, engaging in ongoing training and learning from folks with lived experience and making sure that you're really open to considering making some changes. And I think just catching like certain language in your policies or noticing, if it's a school that has a dress code, how are we communicating around dress and what are the gendered messages that are getting sent around that? Considering housing opportunities depending on what kind of school it is, access to bathrooms, all of these pieces that like walk through your school and imagine that you are non-binary and see if you feel like there are places for you to change, to pee, to do what you need to do to move through your school day. And if the answer is no, then you have work to do.
Walk the building. Walk the
Yeah,
building.
take a tour.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Rebecca. I'm grateful for you today and every day. Thank you so much for coming on here and chatting with me on Thrive to Learn.
Thank you.
We're going to make sure that we link your contact information in the show notes for everyone to follow up, be able to follow up with questions, and certainly so that they can find that page that you're describing on your website for resources. So, wow, so glad we had this opportunity to learn from Rebecca Miner today. Let's keep this conversation going. I want to hear what resonated with you, how you can use Rebecca's remarks and her experience and sage wisdom in your school or in your practice, and what stuck out for you. And if you're looking for a partner, I'm here for you. I'd love to jump on a call and chat about how we can work to create an environment where all students can thrive to learn. See you next time.